Hello, once again, my name's Charles R. Sabo doing another teaching video. This time, it's the final chapter of the book I wrote this year that went on the market about 5 or 6 weeks ago. It's called Genesis 1 through 11, a Bible commentary. This is chapter 11 that we're doing today. Here's the book. It's been on the market, like I said, about 5 weeks or so, maybe 6. Great for seminary. It is a textbook. Great for your understudy work, your undergraduate work, and then also great for Bible studies in general. Many people misinterpret Genesis 1 through 11. It's responsible for a lot of atheism that people get taught the pulpits wrongfully, causing people to disbelieve eventually because of how uncertain they were that the creation was true, and how things transpire. That doesn't sound right. And so it brings doubt. But when you hear the actual truth, it all makes sense. It all falls in place bit by bit. It makes sense. And so you have to study it in depth. There are extra biblical books that Moses had access to. Therefore, his ambiguity is explained because he had the extra biblical books. He left us with ambiguity, realizing that we had the extra biblical books to go to. And then the church has pushed away the extra biblical books and not used them, and made presumptions, or I'm going to say assumptions, and wrongful assumptions in the interpretation of Genesis 1 through 11. So here we go. If you're curious, go through all my other first 10 teaching videos on Genesis 1 through 11, the first 10 chapters. We come now to Genesis 11. And this, for believe it or not, I don't know what it is. The people of the world walk around with blinders on and not realizing what Genesis 11 was about, and how we have dispersed throughout the world with various languages. Oh, it was brought up and researched. It just transpired that way, that this language was this and this, and they just make assumptions. Well, let's go through Genesis 11 and figure this out. Now, if you followed Genesis 6, 7, and 8, you'll realize that the flood came, got rid of the corrupted DNA of mankind, as well as every living creature that was corrupted upon the face of the earth. Noah brought the uncorrupted creatures off the ark, along with his uncorrupted family, and the earth was restarted with uncorrupted DNA. Now we're all the way into Genesis 11, where it's actually between 101 years and 339 years that this transpired. There's no exact date, but we can round it down to between 101 and 339 based on the age of Peleg at this time, right? Because it was during his time that the dispersion of the people, the separation of the people, and the languages happened. You'll find that in Genesis 10. I might mention it here, but we'll see. I've got an introduction to the chapter. Follow along, and then we'll go right into verse 1. The first 9 verses of Genesis chapter 11 first 9 verses are, I need to fix that. Funny how the things you see when you didn't see it the first 50 times you read it, and then I see that. The first 9 verses of Genesis chapter 11 are misunderstood and not taken very seriously by the world, even though it provides answers to many questions concerning the origins of humanity, right? There was an agenda being accomplished by both the spiritual realm as well as the tyrannical kingdom being initiated by Nimrod, son of Cush, son of Ham, son of Noah, right? So Nimrod was son of Cush, son of Ham. Cush was son of Ham. Ham was son of Noah, right? So there's your genealogy on Nimrod. Well, from the time that Noah and his sons exited the ark, the spiritual agenda was already being manipulated by Satan, his angels, and the demonic spirits. From what I discussed concerning Genesis 10, 8, and 9, Nimrod sought out power to rule the earth in a one-world government, with all people on earth serving nobody but him. So you think, well, that doesn't say it anywhere in the Bible. What do you mean Genesis 8 and 9 doesn't say that? Well, because Genesis 10 9 was misinterpreted. One word. All right. So if you're curious, go back. Go back to that video on Genesis 10. Book of Jasher 7:46 through 47. As I said, Book of Jasher is not canon. It's not God inspired, but it is written by people who were godly, who were writing down and logging the events of the times that they were living in, that they were experiencing. They were writing as historians. This happened, and this happened, and this happened. They're historians, just like Flavius Josephus was in the first century. So were the scribes, Pharisees, whoever was taking the time to write down what had happened. And so it's always been written down ever since the beginning. But people, oh no, that can't be true. It can't be true. How did that happen? Well, ignore them. Ignore them. This book has been available. It's supported by the Bible in 2 or 3 different locations. I don't know if I've indicated it in this chapter, but I have indicated many times how it was Joshua, King David, and then the Apostle Paul all recognized the book of Jasher and what it had to say. Then we'll go with, we'll just start with Book of Jasher, chapter 7, verse 46 and 47. And all the earth was of one tongue and words of union. But Nimrod did not go in the ways of the Lord, and he was more wicked than all the men that were before him from the days of the flood until those days. And he made gods of wood and stone, and he bowed down to them, and he rebelled against the Lord, and he taught all of his subjects and the people of the earth his wicked ways. And Mardon, his son, was more wicked than his father. All right? So you can see what was happening just in 2 verses. You can see, you kind of get the gist of what was happening during this time of Genesis 11, verses 1 through 9. Remembering what Flavius Josephus had written, the motives of Nimrod were absolutely satanic. I'll quote you Flavius Josephus right here. He also gradually changed the government into tyranny, seeing no other way of turning men from the fear of God but to bring them into a constant dependence on his power. Josephus, his famous historian, Flavius Josephus, wrote that. Josephus also reported that Nimrod had the people build the tower up so high that the Lord would not be able to reach them, and if he were to flood the world again. So once again, this satanic realm, they accuse God of being a liar because God said he would never flood the earth again. But here's the satanic realm saying he would. Let's build up a tower in case he does. It happens today. The people accuse God of lying. He motivated the people with the pursuit of a kingdom that excluded God, and even conspired to defeat God if the battle ever came to be. Right? Okay. As we break down these first 9 verses in Genesis 11, we can put ourselves at the scene of the event while looking in from the outside. The people of the earth dwelled in one metropolitan area consisting of Babel and its suburbs, Erech, Akkad, and Calneh. You can get that information from Genesis 10:10. See, they're all in the Mesopotamia Valley in one location. Well, Babel it was like New York. There's New York and its suburbs. Any place that lives in a metropolis has its city limits, and then there's the suburb cities. Well, that's how it was. Genesis 10:10. This was the Mesopotamian Valley, known then as the land of Shinar. Their tyrannical ruler Nimrod was well liked, and his subjects willing to do anything that he commanded. At some point, the people began to think of him as their god as they worshipped him. Considering everything that Nimrod and the people desired to do, they believed that they would not be stopped. Therefore, evil tyranny would be able to flourish. No other empire could move in and take the kingdom from them, because all were there in one place and within this one empire. No accountability was possible because there were no other societies to question their decisions. Gee, why did the dispersion happen? Can you kind of get a read out of this now? One world government. Nobody holds them accountable because there is nobody else. The Lord saw this one world society occurring and stepped in and changed things again in order to bring accountability and diversity to mankind. As we get into the last 23 verses of chapter 11, we will see that Moses provided the genealogy that would eventually lead to Messiah. He once again gave ages of fatherhood and lifespans of each person, which continued to allow us to know that year each person had lived. The family tree of Israel had been disclosed for future generations to remember. The data is there, even though many refuse its authenticity. I mean, it's right here. The age of the earth. It's right here. We people say, "Oh, it's millions." So I'm offended when people say it's 10,000 years old. That means they didn't even read the Bible. Oh, they say, "Oh, it could be 8,000." No. What's the Bible say? At the time of the flood, it was 656 years when the flood came. Peleg was born 101 years after the flood. Well, the flood was 1 year, so 657 years plus 101 years, the age of Peleg when he was born. So that's 1,768 years potentially after the flood, or excuse me, after creation, into the creation. But Peleg lived 238 years, so it happened somewhere in that 238 year realm or period. Okay, so hopefully you're understanding so far. I'm trying to be as clear as I can. Genesis 11, verse 1, and the whole earth was of one language and of one speech. Some will twist their theology in order to maintain their own agendas while attempting to discredit the Word of God. They maintain Genesis chapter 10 as a timeline before the events before chapter 11. It's not. It is a genealogy report, but it's just a summation of the sons of Noah getting off the ark. The sons both of Japheth, of Ham, and of Shem are disclosed up into the Tower of Babel. The families are disclosed that were involved in the Tower of Babel. They maintain Genesis chapter 10 as a timeline before the events before chapter 11. Through their ignorance, they find that Genesis 10:5, Genesis 10:20, and Genesis 10:31 indicate that the sons of Noah were speaking in diverse tongues before the event of chapter 11, verse 1 through 9. They weren't. They weren't. Because here it says in verse 1, and the whole earth was of one language and of one speech. So Genesis chapter 11, verse 1 through 9 gives the reason they were dispersed throughout the land, throughout the earth. And the reason that the languages were confounded. Because Genesis chapter 10 discloses a summation of the people that were involved. Right? And then it does tell that they were dispersed. And I gave you where they dispersed to even in my commentary. Watch the video, chapter 10. It's an interesting chapter if you look at it the way I did. Okay, a person must understand that chapter 10 is a summary of the sons of Noah in the order that they were born under their families, which can be construed to be before the Genesis 11 account, but still maintains the post-dispersion results in regards to what was being disclosed in Genesis 10:5, Genesis 10:20, and Genesis 10:31. The chapter 10 genealogy sets up the participants for us to understand that there were many people in Babel, Erech, Akkad, and Calneh during the event of chapter 11. The events of chapter 11. The stage is set, and verse 1 is indicated that the whole earth was of one language and one speech. Pretty clear to me, unless you are listening to some heretic behind a pulpit somewhere. I'm rough on the church because so many people have misinterpreted it and caused false beliefs. The one language which was being spoken on the planet during this time had been spoken since Adam and Eve first spoke it. Can we agree upon that? It would be safe to conclude that God originated his one language for all mankind to speak. Can we presume that since the whole earth was speaking one language and it was probably the same language that Adam and Eve were speaking when after the fall? Or even in the garden? If you don't believe that, then you're not going to believe anything in the Bible, because you've got to. There's a lot of things that God gives us that He knows we're smart enough to figure it out just from the information. Logic. If there was one language on the earth, it was the same language Adam and Eve spoke. We can presume that this language would be God's preference, and that it may be the language of heaven as well as eternity. If that's a presumption. If Hebrew was the preferred language of Israel, which had been spoken by Abraham even while living in Ur, then we might want to consider that God's preferred language may have stayed with the sons of Arphaxad. Arphaxad is the messianic line to he's the son of Shem, who led to Messiah, his messianic line. So Arphaxad stayed, and probably Shem, who was still alive, probably maintained the same language they always had, because they were of God's people. Since God had been planning for Hebrew to be spoken even in Israel in the last days, it is possible that Hebrew is the one language of eternity. I'm presuming you can't be dogmatic, but if then logic, that one language from Babel, God didn't destroy the language they were speaking. He just dispersed the languages, and I'm sure, well, gee, why not keep this one language that they were always speaking? Who would keep it would be his chosen people. Well, his chosen people was Arphaxad, and then his son, and then the ones that lead to Messiah, who eventually leads to Abraham, I'm sorry. And they were speaking Hebrew. Since God had been planning for Hebrew to be spoken even in Israel in the last days, it is possible that Hebrew is the one language of eternity. I've already said that. If Arphaxad and his sons had been speaking Hebrew, which was handed down to Abraham, then it might be realistic to conclude that God allowed for his planned family to keep and maintain his heavenly language. This is a presumption by me, only because it doesn't make sense any other way. I don't think it makes sense that he confounds the language and gets rid of the language that Adam and Eve and everybody was speaking. He didn't get rid of that language. He just confounded the languages, and people couldn't understand what the other languages were. Well, even the Hebrew language that was being spoken by Shem, by Noah. Remember, I read in Book of Jasher that Noah was around teaching Abraham. All right. So if they're speaking the same language back then, Noah spoke the same language he always spoke. He wasn't a sinner. I mean, when I say that, he didn't deserve to have his language confounded. He was obedient. He spoke his same language. His son Shem did too. Arphaxad did too. I'm making a presumption, but it makes sense. It may be that Hebrew had been spoken originally in the Garden of Eden, on the ark, and then the one language before the Tower of Babel. I'm presuming once again, but it makes the most sense. Verse 2. And it came to pass, as they journeyed from the east, that they found a plain in the land of Shinar, and they dwelt there. Now, the pronoun they refers back to the noun world in the previous verse, which was defined as the whole world, right? From what we have already been disclosed of in Genesis 10:10, Nimrod established his kingdom in the land of Shinar. As Noah and his sons scouted for fertile soil after the flood, they had migrated to this location. We know that the ark landed in the location in the mountains of Ararat, according to Genesis 8:4. Most likely, because of the desirable soils for crops, they found the Mesopotamia Valley. So Nimrod didn't find the valley. Noah and his sons did. They didn't stay living in the mountains of Ararat. They looked for a place to live. Once again, it doesn't say that anywhere, but it's safe to assume if the whole world was around in the Mesopotamia Valley for Genesis 11, then Noah was there too, and his sons were there, right? Well, how did everybody else get there? Noah and his sons settled there. That's a presumption once again, but the most likely one. Because it was all right, because it was so desirable of a location and the desire of King Nimrod to rule over the entire population, the people were compelled to remain in just the one location, right? And here we can take a look. All right, Shinar, most likely in Iraq, right? And if you want to take a look, Ararat's up here. That's why I gave you this mountain. There's Ararat. So they followed this river all the way down to Shinar, right? See this? They walked along the river, Noah and his sons. They've been along, and look at the mountain range here. So they were in Ararat over here, still had mountain ranges they were following, but they eventually came down to Shinar. You can't say that Nimrod found the place and everybody just followed him. The evil realm might say that. And we can see from the above map the land of Shinar is not east of the mountains of Ararat, but is directly south following the Euphrates River. Okay, so that's the Euphrates River going from Ararat all the way down to Shinar. Though there are many opinions that desire to relocate Shinar more west, I do not see it as true. The most logical place is between the Tigris and Euphrates River in the Mesopotamian Valley. The translators have screwed up again with their choice of definitions for the Hebrew words. The Hebrew word kedem is inflected as mikedem and is a prepositional phrase with an absolute singular masculine noun. The definitions of kedem are east, antiquity, front, that which is before, aforetime. The proper context is important to realize that the noun is not a location, but rather a time. The verse should be understood to say, and it came to pass as they journeyed from the aforetime that they found a plain in the land of Shinar. Noah and his sons traveled south along the Euphrates River before this time and settled in the Mesopotamia Valley, the land of Shinar. Right? So go back to this verse, and it came to pass as they journeyed from the east that they found a plain in the land of Shinar. Who traveled from the east? Noah and his family are. If it wasn't after Noah and his family, if the entire earth is down here in Shinar, there's nobody else anywhere else. So the most logical conclusion can be that the original 8 people of the earth looked for fertile soils and found it, so that and it came to pass as they journeyed from the aforetime, they being Noah and see, I don't, it means the world, right? They means the world. We're referring back to the world, the noun in Genesis in verse 1, right? And it came to pass as they journeyed, the world journeyed, as well Noah and his sons, the world. Yeah, the more sons and daughters and all that that are born as they grow up into teens and get married, the less likely all of them are going to be in agreement to move at the same time. So it was Noah and his family, and there may have been other marriages happening, but they did travel down. They being the world at that time, maybe still the family of Noah, maybe grandsons and so forth, but they're still traveling south, maybe great grandsons and what have you. They're still traveling together as a family. The world traveled down, right? Hopefully you understand that. The translators don't do us any justice. When they chose to put the definition as, and it came to pass, so they journeyed from the east. They journeyed from the east, right? And they found a plain. Well, that gets everybody thinking that they they journeyed from the aforetime, the time before, from the time place from before, and they found a plain in the land of Shinar. It's not. and they journeyed from the east. Where do you get east? It wasn't in the east. There's so people are calling um, Shinar be over here somewhere. Oh, journey from the east. Yeah, over here somewhere. When it's actually along the Euphrates, down here. The translators thought a third comma in the sentence was worse than having a hanging dependent clause following a semicolon. I chose the third comma to be more acceptable. They that found a plain in the land of Shinar, and they dwelt there. Since the time of the travels of Noah and his 3 sons, they dwelt in the land of Shinar. Since the first phrase implies the whole world traveled, we must not conclude they individually traveled all to one location. During the time of Noah and his 3 sons were traveling, they were the whole world. The whole world was Noah and his family. The whole world, even if his grandsons and great grandsons traveled, the population remained where Noah and his 3 sons had settled. The key point of this verse is the aforetime was the time of Noah and his 3 sons. Finally, the recollection of God's command to the sons of Noah should be realized. If the entire world population stayed in one location, then that would be in disobedience to the command of God. That's Genesis 9:1. And God blessed Noah and his sons and said unto them, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. That's part of the everlasting covenant. Amazingly, God had commanded them a second time within the same command in Genesis 9:7. Yet they rebelled a few generations later. They stayed in the land of Shinar. Noah and his sons stayed there too. They were guilty too. They didn't disperse. Nimrod became very influential. Verse 3. And they said one to another, go to, let us make brick and burn them thoroughly. And they had brick for stone, and slime had they for mortar. Once again, the pronoun they reflects back upon the noun expressing the whole world from verse 1. Since the entire population of humankind was in the one place, they were easily manipulated by their king Nimrod. The people of the world population teamed up together and decided to make bricks. Obviously, we know that it was a tower, as verse 11:4 states. This is the first time in the Bible that bricks were to be made instead of using stone. They most likely used an oven to bake the bricks, just as most bricks are made in the modern day. They apparently needed an extreme amount of mortar for such an enormous project. Through improvisation, they developed slime. The Hebrew word is hemar, from the mud, which may have had various ingredients such as pitch, tar. All right. Book of Jubilees 10:20 says, and they began to build in the 4th week. They made brick and fire, and the bricks served them for stone, and the clay which they had cemented them together was asphalt, which comes out of the sea and out of the fountains of the water in the land of Shinar. Historians ignorantly want to imply that Freemasonry evolved from the guilds of stonemasons and cathedral builders of the Middle Ages. Our historians are terrible too. However, the spiritual ties of Masonry to Satanism goes as far back as the mystery religion, which evolved from the Tower of Babel and the worship of Nimrod. Anybody that studied this knows this, but ignorance rules over the world. During this time, the one world government was ruled by Nimrod, who brought an evil anti-Yahweh mentality to the world population. The ties between Freemasonry and the occult was spread out to all parts of the earth as a result of what happened here in Genesis 11:1-9. The legend of their first attempt at a one world government has always been remembered by the occult, but ignorantly forgotten by God's people. Isn't that ridiculous? God's people don't realize that the one world government was once a reality. Genesis 11:1-9 declares it. Yet people walk around ignorantly. Yet the occult recognizes it, remembers it, and strives to be there again. Most orders of Freemasonry will observe the King James Version of the Bible, which has documented here the last attempt as bringing the one world government and religion to the earth. Yes, they do believe that God is real, but they strive to bring their one world leader, Antichrist, to rule. Because they received their instructions from the satanic realm, they strive to bring a different ending to what the Bible has already proclaimed to come to pass in the future. Apparently, Satan still thinks that he can win. All right? This is all interesting stuff. It's theology, and you're learning theology here if you're learning this. Verse 4. And they said, Go to let us build us a city and a tower, and whose top may reach unto heaven, and let us make us a name, lest we be scattered abroad upon the face of the whole earth. The most important word in this verse is the noun name. The translators use this noun for the Hebrew noun sim, which is not inflected, so its definitions are not pointing to anyone or anything but the verb. Since it is the people of the world that are represented by the pronoun they, then it is correct to use the pronoun us when connecting this to the verb make. Does that make sense? So they did it right this way. The definitions of the Hebrew noun sim are name, reputation, fame, glory, monument, memorial. The definitions of the Hebrew verb asa are to do, fashion, accomplish, make. The chosen verb make fits the sentence context, but the noun should be memorial. Anytime you build a memorial, you have established a name or reputation of yourselves and your agenda. Freemasonry knows this. Unfortunately, Christianity doesn't. The people of satanic occult of Nimrod desired to build a memorial in case they be scattered abroad upon the face of the whole earth. The occult has since remembered this day while they continuously attempt to bring the one world government / religion, one world religion, back into existence. There have been countless evil agendas attempted by power-hungry tyrants who seek to rule the world throughout history ever since this day. Satan seems to always have his Antichrist candidate continuously in office somewhere close by. I think I quote you 1 John 2:18. John said, Little children, it is the last days, and as you have heard, the Antichrist shall come. Even now are there many antichrists, whereby we know that it is the last days. So, with what John says, there's always an antichrist around. It's just that when the time comes, the time's right, whoever's there representing Satan is going to step up and be that antichrist. All right. The city was Babel, which the people chose to build a tower specifically for a memorial of their satanic agenda in case lest they were scattered by God because of their rebellion and disobedience to Genesis 9:1 and 9:7. The question that should be asked and answered is, why build a tower whose top may reach heaven? It would be ridiculous to think that anyone could build a tower to go into the sky to reach heaven. The motives were spoken of in the book of Jasher. It's actually Jasher 9:26, as though they had three mentalities. All right, here's the mentalities that the book of Jasher actually gives you the impression of. We will ascend into heaven and fight against God. We will ascend to heaven and place our own gods there and serve them. We will ascend to heaven and smite God with bows and spears. Total rebellion. Total rebellion. Though mentality number 1 is similar to mentality number 3, the method of battle seems more distinct than mentality number 3. The book of Jubilees provides the actual size of the structure being built until the Lord did step in. Stepped in. Oh, there's another misspell. Oh my, it's 2 typos I need to fix. The book of Jubilees 10:21 says, and they built it. 43 years were they building it. Its breadth was 203 bricks, and the height of a brick was the third of one. It was the third of one. Its height amounted to 5,433 cubits and 2 palms, and the extent of one wall was 13 stades and the other 30 states, right? That's what you get in Book of Jubilees. Once again, the Book of Jubilees is very, very, very trustworthy. All right. Genesis 11:5. And the Lord came down to see the city and the tower which the children of men built. Why would God choose to come down? He's been watching this for 43 years. All the while, Peleg was still alive. And the Lord came down to see the city and the tower which the children of men built. Now, because of the importance of what was happening among the people of the earth, the Lord descended down to the land of Shinar to address the issue at hand. The translators used the verb see for the Hebrew verb re'ah, which in the qual infinitive form. Re'ah, the qual infinitive form. The qual infinitive form of re'ah has several meanings. The correct contextual meaning should be to give attention to, right? Not to see. He could see from up there. To give attention to address it. So the translators don't do any favors to any of us. He did not need to see it because he is omnipresent and could already see what was happening. All right. And the Lord came down to give attention to the city and the tower which the children of men built. Does that make more sense? It does make more sense. If you know who God is, if you know God, that's what he was doing, to give attention to what they were doing. It is the Lord who can see everything, but when it is time for placing judgment, he gives attention to what is being done. He gave attention to the city and the tower, which the children of men built. The purpose of the coming down to the land of Shinar was to give attention to what the people of the earth were doing, so then he would present them with judgments, and they would know it was the Lord. Verse 6. And the Lord said, behold, the people is one, and they have all one language, and this they begin to do, and now nothing will be restrained from them, which they have imagined to do. All right. So I can read that just the way it is and make sense of it. Many people can't. When people are united as one with one language and one government, the controlling government or rulers will have total control and do whatever they want to their kingdom and people. It's evil. Could you imagine if the world right now, in the last days, went to a one world government? One leader would rule everybody. And we know who it is. It's Antichrist. There would be no other kingdoms to hold them accountable for their evil desires. The one world government would have the entire population of humanity under their control, and no other nation would exist to stop them. If one looks at the Bible prophecies for the last days, one can see that the Antichrist kingdom will be a one world government and religion, just as it was in Babel. Well, it wasn't a one religion because there were still some believers there, right? Noah and his son. Noah and Shem, at least. Noah and Shem, trying to think, Arphaxad, and his son Shelah, were all there. They were godly. So there wasn't a one world religion then because of that. Let's look at Revelation 17, 12, and 13. And the 10 horns which they saw are 10 kings, which have received no kingdom as of yet, but receive power as kings 1 hour with the beast. These have one mind, and shall give their power and strength unto the beast. One mind, one world government, right? At the time of the Tower of Babel, it was far too early for God to allow this to happen, since he had not yet sent his Messiah to the earth. The Messiah was to bring God's promise to redemption, which he had promised in the Garden of Eden, Genesis 3:15. With one satanic government ruling over evil people, it would not be possible for mankind to anticipate a Messiah when they would have no desire to receive him. They would all be worshiping their satanic kings through the ages, with no desire for forgiveness from God, and thus be imagining their world depending on themselves without the help from the one true living God. Okay? Do you understand the motive of God? Why he would spread them out, confound the languages. Then there's no possible one world government. Right? and then Israel would eventually come to birth. They would eventually, we don't, not everybody, but those of us who have read the Bible, we know what God did with Moses, with Israel, with Jacob, well, first with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and then the 12 sons. And I mean, it's understood that God brought in Israel. He brought them from the beginning through Abraham and taught them that a Messiah was coming, taught them through Moses, Genesis, the 3:15, the promise of redemption. So then the anticipation, if you read the Old Testament, the anticipation of Messiah through many prophets like Isaiah and Jeremiah, the new covenant. Jeremiah spoke of the new covenant coming. So they're anticipating this new covenant. And so this one world government didn't exist to uh, I would say, chastise them for believing in that. Mankind is wicked if they have no accountability for their actions, right? Mankind is wicked if they have no accountability, right? To see an example of how wicked can be, if given permission to do his own sin's will, one can look back to 1941 in Jedwabne, Poland. And I give you this because it's very upsetting to see how wicked mankind is. After being controlled by Russia for 2 years, Jedwabne, a small town in northeastern Poland, was captured by Germany on June 22, 1941. One of the first questions the Poles asked the Nazis, their new rulers, was if it was permitted to kill the Jews. Why would the Poles want to kill the Jews? Propaganda. Brutal killings by the Poles immediately began and included a Jew stoned to death with bricks, as well as a Jew slashed with a knife, his eyes and tongue cut out. According to Jan Gross's book Neighbors, The Destruction of Jewish Community in Jedwabne, Poland, the Nazis tried to persuade the Poles to keep at least one Jewish family from each profession. The Nazis were trying to convince the Poles. But the Poles responded, "We have enough of our own craftsmen. We have to destroy all Jews. None should stay alive." These are the Poles. These weren't the Germans. Gross writes that Jedwabne mayor agreed to help facilitate a massacre that Poles from local villages came to watch and celebrate the event as a holiday. About half the men of Jedwabne, 1,600 Catholic community participated. Catholics, oh gee, who would have figured that? Catholics doing something evil. Community participated in torturing Jedwabne's 1,600-member Jewish community, corralling them in a barn which was then set ablaze. These people dwelt with them for centuries, yet through propaganda, satanic propaganda, they hated the Jews. The Jews didn't do anything. There were some Jews that were best friends with Poles. Yet they chose to do this. The Jews had lived in Jedwabne, Poland, had been living there side by side with the Polish people, cross-marrying and befriending one another for over 3 centuries. Upon the Nazi takeover and the anti-Jew propaganda that had been in place during that time, these evil Poles chose to kill half of their population out of hate. This is how wicked mankind is, and Satan knows it. All Satan and his dominion have to do is stir the pot, right? Stir the pot, because man is desperately wicked from their youth. Verse 7. Let us go down, let us go down, and there confound their language, that they may not understand one's other speech. Since the Hebrew verb yehab also means come, the modern English would be better to say, come, let us go down, right? The pronoun us is mysterious. Since they were came down from heaven, the choices would be either the triune Godhead, us, or Yahweh and his cherubim, us, and the seraphim angels. The book of Jasher and the book of Jubilees both implied that it was the Lord and his angels. I am open to either scenario, that it could have been the triune Godhead or the angels. Either one is fine with me. because the Lord was there. We're talking the Son of God, not God the Father. It was the Son of God, God the Son, the pre-incarnate Christ. Either way, it was a supernatural event which God had used his power to confound the family's languages. This would prevent the various family groups to not understand the speech of the other family groups, right? The work environment changed in an instant. Can you imagine a construction site suddenly interrupted by not being able to communicate with one another? Arguments, wrong interpretation of intent, as well as uncertainty in what to do and what is being said can stop construction very quickly. They could work silently for only so long before the first decision needed to be agreed upon between two groups. The frustration confounded them and they eventually just had to give up. Verse 8 then explains the intent for their confounding of the languages. Simply stopping the construction of a structure really made no major impact, except for establishing the frustration and the need to separate. The Lord scattered them abroad from thence upon the face of the earth, and they left off to build the city. Now, going back on this, on verse 7, do you understand here? God confounded the languages. Now, I I can't be dogmatic. I believe that Noah, who is still alive, and Shem, who is still alive, and Arphaxad, and his son Shelah, who was the next in line in the Messianic bloodline, they were God's people who God planned to bring the Messiah. I believe that they were speaking Hebrew still, that this was the original language from the Garden of Eden. I'm going to believe that. You can't be dogmatic. It doesn't say it anywhere. But that's what I believe. I believe that because it makes the most sense. God has a language. Why did Hebrew survive from the time of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob through the captivities, two different captivities, two different destructions of the temple, then the reestablishment of Jerusalem on May 15, 1948, the Hebrew language came back, and they're speaking Hebrew in Jerusalem today. How can this be? We're talking thousands of years later, the same language exists. All right, let's move on. Just as it says here, it was the Lord who scattered the nations across the globe of the earth. The languages were first made diverse so that the people would dwell in with their family members who spoke the same language as them. So if you speak the same language, follow me. Otherwise I don't understand a word you said. So the confounding of the languages and scattering of the people prevented humanity from entering into a point of no return. More importantly, God made sure that there were many nations because only then would people be able to choose a better kingdom to serve. This would give accountability for kingdoms to not be able to rule very long as tyrannical, abusive governments. The threat of wars can be seen as something that kept governments and rulers accountable. In addition, history shows that God placed judgments upon evil kingdoms by using his chosen nations to afflict his wrath. Ezra 5:10 says, "But after that our fathers had provoked the God of heaven into wrath. He gave them into the hand of Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, the Chaldean, who destroyed this house and carried the people away into Babylon." So God used other countries to pour his wrath. He used the Assyrians, and the Assyrians were not righteous at all. Yet he used them because Israel deserved to be, the northern kingdom deserved God's wrath, and God brought it. In the case here with Nebuchadnezzar over Judah and Jerusalem, they deserved God's wrath, and he brought it through another kingdom. It was part of God's plan. The translators chose to complicate even the last clause of the sentence. The colon after the noun earth leaves the last dependent clause by itself and is an incomplete sentence. It would be more appropriate to use a comma, which would then connect this dependent clause to complete the sentence. The pronoun they reflects upon the previous noun them. The pronouns in the previous three verses reflect upon the noun people in verse 11:6. the translators use the verb expression left off, which really is awkward to the structure of the sentence. If someone left, it would mean that they went. The people did not went off to build the city. They stopped from building the city. Right? If they left, they went. So they left off. They went off to build the city. They left off to build the city. See, it's awkward. The English translators once again screwed us. The Hebrew verb used by Moses was hedal, which is defined as to stop, cease, desist, forego, cease to be, leave, undone. Proper English should say, and they ceased to build the city. There's your proper context, your proper expression, in modern English at least. If this is the King James English, to say it that way, no wonder everything is confused. Because it confuses me to read it. And they left off to build the city. So they went to build the city? No, they ceased to build the city. Right? The verb hedal, to stop, cease, desist, forgo, cease to be, leave, undone. Leave undone, right? Well, if they're going to say left off, say left undone. And they left undone to build the city. Well, they have to restructure it there too, don't they? Anyway, the translators are very frustrating to me, as you probably have found out with the many videos that I speak against them. Therefore is the name, this is verse 9, I'm sorry. Therefore is the name of it called Babel, because the Lord did there confound the language of all the earth. And from thence did the Lord scatter them abroad upon the face of the earth. Now, this verse is the summation of the outcome of what happened at the Tower of Babel. It explains to the readers how and why there are so many diverse languages. The world walks around oblivious to it. It just through the cavemen and then society, the Sumerians, they came up with a language, and it's dispersed into many other languages. And they think science is so false that, I mean, they make assumptions. Most of your science out there, most of your history is assumptions. It really is. A lot of assumptions made by non-believers, by evil people, make assumptions, and the world takes it as history. The Hebrew locative noun Babel is defined as confusing by mixing. This confounding of the languages was the method of choice by the Lord in order to scatter the people abroad so that they would build many other cities across the whole earth. Here in Genesis 11, verses 11, excuse me. Here in Genesis 11, 1 through 9, Moses explained the verses of Genesis 10:5, 10:20, and 10:31. All the sons of Shem, Ham, and Japheth were at the Tower of Babel for this event that were mentioned in chapter 10. Genesis 11, verses 1 and 2, when the Lord confounded the languages, they scattered across the globe into many cities and nations. So here's the explanation of what was meant by Genesis 10:5, 10:20, and 10:31. If you go back to those three verses, it'll say that these are the tongues and these are the sons of Ham, and the tongues of it says that, and people make assumptions that they were speaking different tongues before Genesis 11, which is an absolute heresy, actually, but ignorance, pure ignorance. Verse 10. These are the generations of Shem. Shem was 100 years old and begat Arphaxad 2 years after the flood. This is a little bit of information that we can use from previous verses to make correct presumptions. The third son of Shem was Arphaxad, who is in the genealogical records leading to Messiah through his son Salah. Now, for the rest of this chapter, right, Moses wrote of the ages of the sons of Arphaxad as their sons were born. This provides a recorded historical date of the generations leading to Messiah Jesus. From the dates of ages of Genesis 5 and the sons of Adam leading to Noah, then continues here with the sons of Shem, which led to Messiah. So through the dates of Genesis 5 and Genesis 11, we know how old the earth is through the dates, the time frames of these sons and when they were born, how old the father was when they were born. It's absolute. It's absolute. You can't say that the earth is millions of years old when the word of God says it's only 6,000 years old. 6,000 and change. Um, I'm not going to argue that right now. Where was I? From the dates of ages, I already said that. It is absolutely accurate without no exclusions. The genealogy leads to Abraham, who was the grandfather of Israel, Jacob. Do not listen to heretics who suggest that these genealogies are inaccurate or perhaps missing certain people in the family tree. The truth of God's word can be trusted, unlike the lies of the heretics. So why you believe in the heretic? If it's in the Bible, believe it. If a heretic says there's somebody missing in the genealogy because they want to satisfy this billions of years or millions of years, why would you listen to it? God put it in here for a reason, so that you knew how old the earth was. If Shem begat Arphaxad 2 years after the flood, per Genesis 11:10, then Shem's wife was most likely pregnant with their firstborn Elam when they had gotten off the ark. Think about it. They still needed the year after the flood to birth Ashur, who was the second born, their second born, and then the second year after the flood was Arphaxad to be born. See the logic on that? So she had to be pregnant with child on the ark, but didn't give birth till after they got off the ark, which is considered after the flood, thus keeping Genesis 10:1 absolutely correct. All right. An additional tidbit can be ascertained here. Shem was 98 years old when he begot Elam after the flood. Therefore, Shem was 97 years old when the flood had begun. Right? See the math? See how the math can work in, how certain things spoken in the Bible can give you other information towards other things. They're called presumptions through fact. And um, somebody said, well, you can't just, it doesn't say that he was 97 years old at the time of the flood, so you can't make that presumption. God didn't give you a brain to figure that out mathematically? Or you can't say that she was pregnant on the ark. Oh, yeah, she had 3 kids in 2 years. I mean, come on. 9 plus 9 plus 9 is 27 months. That's 3 years after the flood. She'd be banging out a child every 9 months. No. You figure one child per year. Verse 11. I get very sarcastic. I get very, I almost think of myself mean by saying the things I say, but I have been debating heretics and misled people for years, and I know I can hear them saying certain things in my mind when I'm saying it myself, what is actual truth from what I've discovered. And they'll say, well, it doesn't say, I've heard that, it doesn't say that anywhere. Well, God gave you a brain, you know. And it just makes me mad when people give me that. It doesn't say that. Where does it say that? Do you have a brain? Verse 11. And Shem lived after begat, or facts said 500 years and begat sons and daughters. Now, with this information, we can determine that Shem lived to be 600 years old. Because, why? Why? Because he was 100 when he had Arphaxad. And it says he lived 500 years after he had Arphaxad. So he was 600. Oh, it doesn't say that he was 600 years old. See, that's what these people say. Well, it doesn't say that he was 600, lived to be 600 years old. Well, it doesn't say that here. What do you get that here? And just people that stupid and will actually come out of their mouth. Who does it say? Because they're stupid. I'm not saying you are. It's just that there's people out there and it just makes me mad. Because God gave us a brain to use logic and a brain to do math. Also, we follow the ages of Abraham. We'll find out that Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob were all alive when Shem was in his elderly years. Shem's wisdom and witness concerning the flood, as well as the doctrines of God, were all taught directly to Israel, Jacob, by Shem. So here you have Jacob, Israel, being taught of pre-flood conditions already. Jacob heard it from Shem, who witnessed it. He witnessed the flood. He witnessed getting off the ark. He witnessed all that. The Hebrew language spoken by Abraham to his son Isaac, as well as his grandson Jacob, were passed down from Noah and then Shem. Now, this is a presumption. Oh, it doesn't say that anywhere. Well, it's a presumption. It's a presumption that you think God confounded Noah's language? Did Noah all of a sudden start speaking a different language? Noah? The righteous Noah? Started speaking a different language? No. His family of the direct line to Jacob, Israel, was probably Noah's language. It had to have been. Because I have places in the book of Jasher that show that Noah was teaching Jacob. And Shem was teaching Jacob. Do you think, oh, Shem and Noah all of a sudden didn't understand each other's language? No. Noah and Shem spoke the same language. Because there's a place in the book of Jasher that has them two together speaking to Terah about Abraham. The Hebrew language spoken by Abraham to his son Isaac as well as his grandson Jacob were passed down from Noah and then Shem. Hebrew was the language of Noah and Shem after the Tower of Babel. I strongly believe that the Hebrew language was the original language of Adam and Eve, then on to Noah and Shem. It doesn't take much to construe this. It doesn't say specifically, it doesn't say it anywhere, but it makes the most logical sense. Noah spoke the same language before the flood as he did after the flood. God did not confound Noah's language. He didn't all of a sudden through the Tower of Babel, Noah didn't start speaking Hebrew when he was originally speaking what Adam and Eve spoke. We can all make the right assumption that he was speaking the same language as Adam and Eve. Right? Same language as Methuselah, who taught him that language, along with his dad. But Methuselah and Noah were tight. So Noah's getting off the ark. He's speaking the same language as Methuselah and what have you before the flood. And he had his son Shem. And then Shem goes off to Jerusalem, starts teaching the Canaanites after the dispersion. Well, he didn't go to Jerusalem because God told him to go to Jerusalem. Maybe he did, but he went to Jerusalem because he felt bad for the curse on Canaan. I'm making a presumption again, but here his nephew and his sons and daughters were cursed. And Shem, being a godly man, went to Jerusalem, followed them to the Holy Land, now the Holy Land, and taught the Canaanites because that's where they accumulated. The Canaanites weren't speaking Hebrew. They were speaking their confounded languages. But Shem, speaking Hebrew, went there. Hebrew was the language of Noah and Shem after the Tower of Babel. I strongly believe that the Hebrew language was the original language of Adam and Eve, then on to Noah and then Shem. If you look at it through the genealogies and how the ages, I mean, Noah lived to be 950, Shem lived to be 600. And so the Hebrew language was strong with them, and it went through Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. All right? And so I believe through just through the various logical sense of it, that Adam and Eve's language was spoken through the earth until the time of the Tower of Babel. Noah and Shem and Arphaxad were there. Do you think he confounded their language? He may have. There's no place that says that he didn't confound their language, but I believe in my heart, I know it doesn't mean squat, but that their godly language, Hebrew, which they were already speaking, they were able to keep because that was God's plan. Keep this language with my people, leading to Messiah. Messiah was be speaking Hebrew. And I'm going to give you Book of Jasher 12:69. And Abram ceased to speak when Noah and his son Shem answered Terah, saying, True is the word which Abram has said unto you. Now, what does this show you? That Noah and Shem spoke the same language as Abram and Terah. Terah was Abram's dad. So if they're all speaking the same language, the one important factor has to be thought of. Did God confound Noah's language? Surely Shem and Noah spoke the same language. Why? Why? And then Shem spoke the same language as Abraham. So did God confound Noah's language? Well, obviously, if he did, he confounded Shem's language together with Noah. So why would he keep Noah and Shem speaking the same language, yet Japheth and his sons were speaking different languages? Because Shem was the chosen bloodline to Messiah. So he kept the language pure, the Hebrew language was pure, through Noah and his son Shem, who also taught Abram and Terah, who also, Isaac and Jacob, on through the 12 sons of Israel. It was the original language. This is just logic. It doesn't say it, but you can construe it from what it is saying here. The book of Jasher states that. Now, is the book of Jasher believable? I believe that 99% of the book of Jasher is correct. There's 1% that, 1 or 2% that these are scribes and Pharisees and what have you through the millenniums that were keeping track of the records of the historical accounts up until the time of King David in the book of Jasher, that somebody got a thing or two wrong. But this seems very accurate. That at least the people that wrote, whoever it was that wrote the book of Jasher during this time, knew that Abram spoke the same language as Noah and his son Shem. Right? Isn't that what it says? We would be able to understand that after Shem begot Arphaxad, right? We should be able to understand that after Shem begot Arphaxad, we should be able to. That's an incomplete sentence, and I'm sorry. I need to fix that. He begat. This should be a comma right here. We should be able to understand that after Shem begot Arphaxad, comma, he begat at least two more sons, Lud and Aram. Genesis 10:22. Interestingly, here Moses divulged that Shem had also begot daughters after he had begot Arphaxad. It is uncertain of their names nor how many daughters were born. The Kasdim are who the Bible called the Chaldeans. Kasdima. Thus, Arphaxad is considered the father of the Chaldeans. And the son of Kesed, built the city of Era of the Chaldees and called its name after his own name and his name of his father. That's in the book of Jubilees 11:3. So Arphaxad and the Chaldeans spoke Hebrew. That's what I believe. They spoke. If Abram is speaking God's language when God's speaking to him, the Hebrew, you can't. It doesn't say this anywhere, right? The language doesn't say. But when did Hebrew become a language? Was it through Jacob in Israel that they started speaking Hebrew? Or was it through Isaac? Was it through Abraham? They started all of a sudden speaking Hebrew? No, I believe that Aram, which was Shem's fifth son, I believe, spoke Aramaean. Arphaxad spoke Hebrew in the land of Ur. I believe that's where the Hebrew language remained until Abraham brought it to the promised land. That's my belief, only because there's certain events that have transpired that you got to believe that the languages followed through the godly, I'm going to say bloodline. Genesis 11:12. And Arphaxad lived 530 years and begot Salah. We know that Arphaxad was 35 years old when he begot Salah. We also know that Shem was 135 years old when Salah was born. As we should be able to ascertain, Salah remained in Ur because that is where Abraham had lived before the Lord sent him to the land of Canaan. Because it was Terah and his son Abraham who were natives to the city of Ur-Kasdim, it is believed that the sons of Salah had remained in the city along with the brother Chesed's descendants as well, right? So they stayed in Ur. Now, was Abraham speaking Hebrew? Is the question. When did Hebrew become Hebrew? Or was it always Hebrew? I believe it was always Hebrew and that it was the original language, that it followed the bloodline to Messiah. Verse 13. And Arphaxad lived after he begot Salah 403 years and begot sons and daughters. From this verse, we can ascertain Arphaxad lived for 438 years, right? We have already discovered that Salah had a brother named Chesed who remained in Ur-Kasdim along with his brother. As we are finding out again, Arphaxad had begot multiple sons after he begot Salah, as well as multiple daughters. Names and ages are undisclosed, right? Genesis 11:14. And Salah lived 30 years and begat Eber. From what has disclosed here, Arphaxad was 65 years old when Eber was born, and Shem was 165 years old at this time. There's your math. Once again, we must conclude that Eber remained in Ur-Kasdim during his life, since we know that his descendants were there after him. Verse 15. And Salah lived after he begat Eber 403 years and begat sons and daughters. From what this verse discloses, Salah lived 430 years. As we are finding out, Salah had begot multiple sons and daughters after he begat Eber, right? Verse 16. And Eber lived 430 years and begat Peleg. From what is disclosed here, Salah lived 64 years old when Peleg was born, while Arphaxad was 99 years old while Shem was 199 years old when Peleg was born. This was 101 years after the flood. Okay? That's important to know because it was during the time of Peleg that the earth was scattered and the languages were confounded. And as you can see, Arphaxad, Eber, and Shem were all still alive. What happened to their language? Were they confounded? Or because they are in the godly bloodline to Messiah, did God keep the godly language there? I like to think he did. Verse 17. And Eber lived after he begat Peleg 430 years and begot sons and daughters. From what this verse discloses, Eber lived a total of 464 years. From what we already know from Genesis 10:35, one of the other sons of Eber was Joktan, and his 12 sons who went off to dwell in different places as is implied in 10:32. Right? So Joktan probably had their languages confounded, right? As was their Semites, but their languages were confounded. I believe Arphaxad's language was not. Shem, then Arphaxad, then Salah, then Eber, then Peleg. I believe that through that line, the Hebrew language continued. Verse 18. And Peleg lived 30 years and begat Ru. From what is disclosed here, Eber was 64 years old when Ru was born, and Salah was 94 years old when Ru was born, while Arphaxad was 129 years, while Shem was 229 years old when Ru was born. See why I bring this all in here, because they're still alive. The godly language of Hebrew followed with Ru. And Peleg lived after he begot Ru 209 years and begat sons and daughters. From what was disclosed here and the previous verse, Peleg lived to be 239 years old before he died. Ru was one of multiple sons and daughters born into Peleg. Now, in a note, if Eber was 34 years old when he begat Peleg, then the 34 years could be added to the 67th year that Eber was born, which comes to 101 years after the flood that Peleg was born. Since we know that Peleg lived 239 years, then the events of Genesis 11:19, scattering, dividing of the earth's population, had occurred between 101 years and 340 years after the flood of Noah. Right? Logic, we have this information written. We can use the information with and do our math. And Ru lived 230 years and begat Serug. From what is disclosed here, Peleg was 62 when Serug was born. Eber was 96 years old when Serug was born. Salah was 126 years old when Serug was born, while Arphaxad was 162 years old, while Shem was 261 years when Serug was born. This was 163 years after the flood of Noah. Shem was 98 years old when he got off the ark, right? Verse 21. And Ru lived after he begat Serug 207 years, and begat sons and daughters. Ru had lived to the age of 239 years before he died. This was 402 years after the flood. Not only did Ru begot Serug, but also multiple sons and daughters afterwards. Genesis 11:22, and Serug lived 32 years and begot Nahor. From what is disclosed here, Ru was 62 years old when Nahor was born. Peleg was 92 when Nahor was born. Eber was 126 years old when Nahor was born. Salah was 156 years old when Nahor was born, while Arphaxad was 191 years old when Shem was 291 years old when Nahor was born. All of these people were still alive in the land of Ur, speaking the same language. I believe it was Hebrew. This 100 and this was 193 years after the flood of Noah. Shem was 98 years old when he got off the ark. I'm repeating myself somewhat, but it gives you a perspective that these sons and daughters of Arphaxad are still around while he's speaking their same language that Shem taught him. Shem and Arphaxad were speaking the same language. Noah and Shem were speaking the same language, as we saw in the book of Jasher. Noah was speaking the same language as Adam and Eve. And Serug lived after he begat Nahor 200 years and begat sons and daughters. I can't be dogmatic that Noah spoke the same language after the Tower of Babel. Doesn't say that anywhere. But why would God confound his godly language? Hebrew. I believe that Hebrew was spoken by Adam and Eve, by Noah, by Methuselah, by Enoch, by all of them before the flood. Noah brought that language with him with Shem at the time of the confounding of languages. It doesn't say this anywhere, but I believe that that same language manifested through the sons and daughters. From what is disclosed here in the previous verse, Serug lived to be 230 years old when he died. This was 393 years after the flood. Not only did Serug begot Nahor, but also multiple sons and daughters. Now, verse 24 says, and Nahor lived 29 years and begot Terah. So we know who Terah is. Terah is Abram's father. So I don't need to go through this disclosure in verse 24. I've got it here for people's research so they know, right? This was 222 years after the flood when Terah was born. Abram's father was born 222 years after the flood. Most important part of that verse. Verse 25, and Nahor lived after he begat Terah 119 years, begat sons and daughters. Okay, so this was 341 years after the flood when Nahor died, right? Not only did Nahor begat Terah, but also multiple sons and daughters. Okay, now those multiple sons and daughters were probably speaking the same language in the land of Ur. Hebrew came from out of the land of Ur, is what I believe. Oh, you can look at all the historians and what they've written. They make false presumptions because the Bible tells us that they were in the land of Ur. Abram came out of the land of Ur, did God all of a sudden, zap, you're speaking Hebrew now? Huh? When did Hebrew start? Oh, I better study the historians to figure that out. The secular historians probably know. No, sorry. And Terah lived 70 years old and begat Abram, Nahor, and Haran. From what is disclosed here, Nahor was 99 years old when Abram was born. Serug was 109 years. That goes into all my long disclosure here. This was 292 years after the flood when, I'm going to say, yeah, Abram was the oldest when Abram was born, right? Now, and then once he discloses who Abram is, then we have a place to go, don't we? We know who Abram is because Genesis 12 starts talking about Abram, right? Now, these are the generations of Terah. Terah begot Abram, Nahor, Haran. Haran begot Lot, right? So Moses began to set up the rest of the book of Genesis by revealing the family members of Abraham, here in chapter 11. From what is disclosed here, Abram's brother Haran had a son named Lot. All of the above mentioned offspring were sons of Terah, right? Even Lot's a son of Terah. He's a grandson, but he's still called a son. All right, so book of Jasher 9, verses 2 and 3. Haran was 39 years old when he took her, and the wife of Haran conceived and bare a son. He called his name Lot. And she conceived again and bare a daughter, and she called her name Milcah. And she again conceived and bare a daughter, and she called her name Sarai. Look at that. Sarah. This is Sarai, Abram's wife. Right? When Haran was 39 years old, he took a wife and we got Lot. So Lot was actually Sarai's big brother, right? So Haran was Abram's little brother, right? The youngest of Terah. So if Lot was Abram's nephew, Sarah was Abram's niece. All right? Just for some clarity there, you don't get that in the Bible. Abram calls her his sister, but really she was his niece. From what the book of Jasher discloses, Haran was the father of Lot, but also fathered two daughters. Sarai eventually became Abram's wife. She was his niece, but he told Amalek of Gerar that she was the daughter of his father, but not his mother. Abram and Haran were both sons of Terah, while female offspring of Abram or Haran could be called daughters of Terah also. Isaac, Abraham's son, would be considered a son of Terah. Sarai was born into Haran, but was a daughter of Terah as well as a daughter of Haran. Does that make sense? It's biblical logic, biblical genealogy. Genesis 20, verse 12, and yet, indeed, she is my sister. She is the daughter of my father, Haran. I'm sorry, Terah. Daughter of my father, Terah. She was the granddaughter, but they call her the daughter of Terah, but not the daughter of my mother. See, in biblical genealogy, we'll go with men. Women don't show up in biblical genealogy very often, but not the daughter of my mother, and she became my wife. Now, the daughter of her mother, right? Well, Abram had a mother, but Sarah wasn't born unto her. But Sarah is a daughter of Terah because she's in the bloodline of Terah. It is called, it's the, I'm forgetting the word right now, but it is the biblical, the context biblically is that everyone is a son or daughter of the male, of the grandfather, the great grandfather, the great great grandfather. We're all sons and daughters. I am a son of Noah. I believe I am also a son of Japheth. See how it works? So, and another person that's a daughter under Japheth is a daughter of Japheth, but not a daughter of my mother. Right? Okay. It's hopefully you understand. Verse 28. Haran died before his father Terah in the land of his nativity in Ur of the Chaldees. Right? So it was because the daughters born unto Haran became fatherless that Abram and Nahor chose to take them as wives. It was a matter of family responsibilities in the taking care of Haran's daughters. You don't leave them without. You don't leave them to beg in the streets because they had no husband, no father. So it was it's biblical responsibility for the remaining family members to take on these um, daughters without a father. They don't have she doesn't have a parent. They take them as wives and take care of them. So and Haran was 82 years old when he died in the fire of Kasdim. And the king, princes, and inhabitants of the land, seeing that Abraham was delivered from the fire, they came and bowed down to Abram. Now, this is the book of Jasher, what happened to Haran. Haran was killed in a fire. It was a persecution fire set up by Nimrod, trying to kill Abraham. Haran just happened to be there with him. Abram was the prophesied ruler. His seed was important to God. It threatened Nimrod's kingdom, and so he set out to destroy Abram. The Kasdim are who the Bible has called the Chaldeans. Thus, Arphaxad is considered the father of the Chaldeans. It was called Kasdim, and Genesis 11:28 and 11:31 confirmed that it was its location as Kasdim was up near Haran. All right. I did have a map in chapter 10 of where Haran and Ur of Kasdim are. They're very close by to each other. Ur Kasdim is just north of Haran. I would suspect like 10, 15 miles, maybe 20 kilometers, if you guys don't like miles. Verse 29, and Abram and Nahor took them wives. The names of Abram's wife was Sarai, and the name of Nahor's wife was Milcah. They were sisters, the daughter of Haran, the father of Milcah, and the father of Iscah. So Nahor's wife, Milcah, the daughter of Haran, the father of Milcah. So Haran was the father of Milcah and the father of Iscah. Now, this is a confusing verse, and let's go over that. So who's Iscah? As I commented upon concerning the death of Haran in the previous verse, the remaining two brothers were obligated, family obligation, a godly family obligation to take the daughters of Haran as wives. Both Milcah and Iscah were fatherless, and it was both Abram's and Nahor's responsibility to take them as wives. Since there is no other records concerning the name Iscah, I see this Iscah as being Sarah before marriage. This verse is concerning Abram and Nahor taking wives, while Moses provided that Haran was the father of Milcah, and he was also saying Haran was the father of Sarai. This name Iscah is non-existent in any extra biblical books, while the two daughters of Haran are who the brothers of Haran had taken as their wives. So it's believed that Iscah was the premarital name of Sarai, that once she was taken wife, her name was Sarah. I hold to that. Because the name is there. The name is actually in the Hebrew text, right? And so, what did Moses mean? Well, contextually, it makes sense. So here, there is. Let's see. Let me see what I got here. John Gill, theologian from, I believe, the 18th century. Um, It is not said, now this is John Gill quoting, it is not said whose daughter she was unless she is the same with Iscah, the daughter of Haran, and so had two names, Iscah, her name before marriage, Sarai after it, Abram calling her my mistress, as Sarai signifies as she called him my Lord. So the Targum of Jonathan, Iscah, this is Sarai, right? It is in like manner, Jarchi, Baal, Haturim, and other Jewish writers take them to be the same. So it can be construed that Iscah is Sarah's premarital name. Once she got married, her name was Sarai. And that is the only conclusion you can logically come up with. From the death of Haran revealed in Genesis 11:28, to the disclosure of Nahor and Abram taking the two fatherless daughters as their wives in verse 29, to Genesis 11:30 revealing Sarai was being barren. The biblical context has to be understood as John Gill had disclosed. Iscah, one who looks forth, Sarai equals princess. So the lexicon says Iscah means one who looks forth, looking forward to marriage, looking forward to the rest of my life, the marriage and having kids, the fulfilling God's will. Sarai is the princess of the king, right? Iscah was her name before Abram took her as wife. Then Abram called her Sarai as his princess. The Lord then changed her name to Sarah in Genesis 17:15, noble woman. Sarah means noble woman. Interesting stuff. That Sarah had the same name changes going on as Abram did. Jacob did. Jacob got changed to Israel. And so it's interesting stuff. The patriarchs, God had their names changing. Milcah and Nahor birthed 8 sons, while their youngest son Bethuel begat Rebekah. She became the wife of Isaac, son of Abraham, the promised child. This would have made Rebekah Isaac's double second cousin. Think about it. I mean, Nahor was Nahor. I can't. I'm drawing a Nahor. Yeah, Nahor was Abram's brother, right? And so Rebecca was his niece. Well, his son Isaac married Abram's niece, which was actually his cousin, right? Rebecca. I said second cousin. Let me get this right. Abraham took. Let me see here. Nahor. They call him second cousin. It's actually first cousin. All right. So I said second cousin. Isaac's double second cousin. It is a double cousin for sure. But I think it's just double cousin. I have a double cousin. I have double cousins. When your uncle marries your aunt by blood relatives. Um, Nahor married Abram's other niece, Milcah, right? So here we have Milcah being Abram's niece, right? Has a child with Nahor, his brother. So it's definitely a double cousin, right? I don't know about second. I'd have to relook at that a little closer. But it's interesting stuff. Milcah's being Sarah's sister and Nahor being Abraham's brother. So it's double cousin. I don't know about second cousin, though. I think it's first cousin, right? Double cousins. So Rebecca was Isaac's double cousin. That's a major cousin. That's almost like a brother or sister. I mean, that's that. I mean, to have it be a double cousin. Now, but Sarah was barren. She had no child. So here it says Milcah had 8 sons, or Sarah had no sons. Once the disclosure comes of the 2 brothers of Haran taking their fatherless nieces to be their wives, Moses felt it necessary to mention that Sarah was barren. The point is set up here that it will be the Lord who will bring the promised child in his time. She had no child for many years until the Lord had made his move to bring himself the glory. Additionally, he had plans for a new people called the Ishmaelites, who were sons of Ishmael. son of Abram and Hagar, Sarah's handmaid. This transpired between the time of Abram's marriage to Sarai and the birth of Isaac. It was right in between that. So God had a plan for the Ishmaelites. So therefore, she was barren for a while. So that in desperation, Abram, in lack of faith, because that was a lack of faith in God and what He promised, to take Hagar and mate with her to have a son. Anyway, you'll find that out later in Genesis. Now, verse 31, and Terah took Abram his son, and Lot his son of Haran, his son's son, and Sarai his daughter-in-law, his son's Abram's wife, and they went forth with them from Ur of the Chaldees to go to the land of Canaan, and they came to the Haran, and they dwelt there. This verse has a very important point to make. The travels of Terah, Abram, Sarai, and Lot were important, but only to let us realize that Ur Kasdim was in the same region as the city of Haran. Here's the map. Some people want to say that Ur was way down south here, Ur of the Sumerians, but the Ur of the Kasdim was up here. The Assyrian, later to become the Assyrians, right? They weren't down here. So it doesn't make sense if their travels with Terah had to go all the way up here to Haran first when they were on their way to Shechem in the Promised Land. So coming from Ur the Kasdim was just a short little drift here, and then they settled there because that's as far as Terah went. Terah eventually died, and then Abraham picked up and then traveled on down to the Promised Land after Terah's death. Let's see here. If Ur of the Chaldees was the same as Ur of the Sumerians, it would be absurd to think that they were headed to the land of Canaan and went up north first to Haran. The city of Ur Kasdim is connected to the Kasdim people known as the Chaldeans, who had nothing to do with the Sumerians. Right? Why would people say that Abraham came from Ur of Samaria when he was the Ur of the Kasdim? Terah, Abram, Sarai, and Lot settled in Haran until Terah had died. Please notice that Sarah or Sarai was called Terah's daughter-in-law, which does not actually call her his daughter. That is because she was his granddaughter and daughter-in-law, and she was Haran's daughter, right? So interesting stuff that you just said daughter-in-law, because just to make the point known that she was married now. Verse 32, and the days of Terah were 205 years, and Terah died in Haran. It was 427 years after the flood of Noah when Terah had died in the city of Haran. 205 years was a shorter age than most of the other mentioned in the Bible at this time. The trend of reducing of the lifespans had continued. The new world after the flood of Noah was of a much more physically harsh environment. This is because it is believed that the Earth had half of the oxygen density of the pre-flood conditions, as well as 2 to 3 times more sunlight coming through in the post-flood world. The outcome of the events of Genesis chapter 6 led to the destruction of all flesh in the 1656th year of creation. Then here, as we move forward in Genesis chapter 12, another 427 years have passed, thus making the creation 2,083 years old to this point. So upon the death of Terah in Haran, the creation was 2,083 years old. Nobody's ever told me that. Figure that. Nobody ever, hey, just look at that. Terah died in the 2083rd year of the creation. But we can use it. We can construe this. We can figure it out based on the genealogical reports and the ages. Is the Word of God true? If you believe that everything in the Word of God is true, then these ages and times and of the genealogies is true. I know that there's some people that have taught from pulpits and say, well, I believe the Word of God is true. And then when they're confronted about the genealogical report for the age of the earth, they twist and turn and squirm because they want to allow for those millions of years or thousands of years or whatever it is to appease these evolutionists' heresy, so that they can include evolution into mankind, into the earth, and how the evolution of species happened and all that. Well, bull crap. All right, bull crap. It's absolute heresy. Anybody that tries to teach you that, run, run, because there are heretics. Anyway, I teach the Word of God. It's all true. I go in depth for you to make sense of it, since the translators have screwed us on proper translations of the certain words that change the theology of what's being read. So you have to do your homework to understand what it's saying. The Word of God is true. The Word of God is true. Well, I hope you enjoyed this. The book is finished. It's on the market. You now have all 12 teaching videos teaching you this. Yeah, I'm sorry, I do get a little heated, but that's how, after years of trying to teach it to heretics, they think nothing of being right back in your face. How do you know this? How do you know this? God told me. God told me. Oh, that's heresy. God doesn't tell me. God doesn't tell me. Well, I have His Holy Spirit living inside me, and He tells me through the Spirit. He leads me into do the proper research. It takes research, hermeneutics, to find things. You don't just read the words. Oh, this is probably what it says. Oh, this person from the pulpit said this, so I believe that. Come on. We're supposed to do our own research. You can use Bible commentaries like I have. You can use Bible commentaries like mine to help you to study. But you have to come to a conclusion yourself through your own studies. You can confirm what I say by doing the study yourself and see that it is true. Study this. Anyway, hit like down below, subscribe to my channel. Thank you for watching. May God bless you. Have a great rest of the day.